A serial killer is taunting the police by leaving the strangled bodies of his victims in plain view. Detectives and forensic specialists come up with only the tiniest of clues. A few hairs and fibers, and a muddy tire print. Can these lead to the killer? In the summer of 1994, the first victim, LaDonna Jean Steller, is discovered in a vacant lot in Clearwater, Florida. Investigators find no useful evidence at the scene. A few months later, a delivery driver spots something in the weeds on the side of the road. He calls the police. First on the scene is Officer Glenn Ward. He checks for a pulse.
Sector 89, confirm signal 7.
There is none. Next to arrive is the Pinellas County Forensic Science Unit. Their job is to collect physical evidence.
These aren't your tire tracks, right, Glenn?
No, sir, they're not.
Lieutenant Walt Jacques notices a possible clue, a tire print at the edge of the road. The sandy soil in this part of Florida doesn't usually make for a clear tire print, but rains during the night have left the ground muddy. First, the track is photographed. Then, castings are made of selected segments of the track. Dental cement, the same material used by orthodontists, is poured into a metal form. The team searches the grass for trace evidence.
Looking for anything that would fluoresce.
Using a high-powered light, the investigators trace a path to the body. The light reveals fibers, hair, blood, and other substances. The light shines at wavelengths that cause materials to fluoresce. Orange goggles help make evidence stand out sharply. Soon the victim is identified. Her name is Wendy Evans. She was killed by strangulation. Is a serial killer on the loose in Pinellas County? Evidence collected at the crime scene is sent here to Florida's Department of Law Enforcement. Jerry Serino is the chemist assigned to the case.
It can literally take weeks to go through the debris that is recovered from a crime scene. Kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Serino looks for things out of the ordinary, such as unusual colors or materials. And he finds something, a pink nylon fiber, most likely from a carpet. Carpet fibers are valuable clues because they can link suspects to a specific location. Examiners also find hairs on the body, but they aren't human hairs. These short brown hairs belong to a dog. There is one piece of evidence left to examine: the tire track. Peter McDonald is a tire track identification expert. He agrees to help with the case. McDonald begins by studying the photographs taken at the crime scene. When he examines the tread pattern, he recognizes it immediately. This tire, called an ATX, was designed for small pickups and sport utility vehicles. McDonald tells detectives that the tire print at the crime scene was probably left by a small truck riding on a relatively new set of Firestone ATXs. In the following months, 2 more murders take place. First, the decomposed body of Peggy Darnell is discovered beneath power lines. Then, Cynthia Hughes is found behind a trash can. Examiners find pink fibers and dog hairs on Pugh's body, just like those on Wendy Evans. Now there is little doubt. A serial killer is at work in Pinellas County. The only hope of stopping him is to find the car that left that tire print. But how? The search starts at the county's main tire dealer. Lieutenant Good pays a visit to manager Larry Morgan.
We're investigating a series of homicides over in Pinellas County.
Morgan offers to check the company database. The computer shows the tire is sold out.
Look at that. We had 4, we sold 4, September 11th, 1995.
The last set was purchased 8 months earlier. Someone named Terry Joe Howard purchased the last set. Howard is placed under surveillance while detectives check her background.
From there, we went out and actually found the vehicle parked at her residence one night and were able to confirm that those tires were on that vehicle.
Is Howard the killer? The next step for the investigators is to examine her tires to see if they match the print. Morgan tells Howard that her tires have been recalled and she can come in for free replacements.
But we've made arrangements.
A week later, accompanied by a man, Howard shows up for her new tires.
Hi, I'm Terry Jo Howard. You called me about my tires?
The switch takes less than 5 minutes. At a police garage, detectives prepare to make an ink print of the tread patterns on Howard's tires, now mounted on a similar vehicle. A long strip of cardboard is used as an ink pad. The ink is the same kind used for fingerprints.
Looks good.
Come slow.
Carefully, the tire is rolled over the ink pad.
Keep it coming.
Okay, go.
Are we okay, Sandy?
Yeah, go.
The tire is then rolled over a clean length of cardboard. Once all 4 tires are printed, the strips will be analyzed. But by now, detectives have a new lead to follow.
Target's walking eastbound towards your car.
During the course of the surveillances, we noticed a white male, and that's when we identified James Randall.
James Randall, Terry Jo Howard's boyfriend, is the man who accompanied her to the tire store. While detectives check Randall's background, McDonald examines the tires from Howard's car. Treads are made up of geometric shapes called pitches. At first glance, the pitches seem to be the same size. But in fact, their sizes vary widely. This is the key to tire identification.
With this sequence of pitches, you can determine the exact location on the tire that made the imprint.
McDonald can tell which part of the tire left the print. But he still doesn't know if it was this tire or another of the same model. He needs to find a match point, a place on the print that could have been made by this tire only. So McDonald turns to a more subtle feature, the tiny cuts on the tire's surface called sipes. During manufacturing, the sipes are molded into the tires by small steel teeth. But occasionally, tires come out of the mold with a few sipes missing. Why? Because the fragile metal teeth sometimes break off. McDonald finds a missing sipe in the tire print. He finds the same missing sipe in the same location on the right rear tire taken from Howard's truck. Now there is no doubt. This tire left the print at the crime scene. It's a major break in the case. Terry Jo Howard's truck has been placed at the scene of one of the murders. And fibers and hairs link that crime to one of the other murders. And there's more. By now, the background check on James Randall has come in. He served 6 years in a Massachusetts prison for sexual assault, and he was a suspect in a murder case. but investigators lacked enough evidence to indict him. In both crimes, the victims were strangled. Now the detectives want to arrest Randall, but they know that unless they have enough evidence, they can't hold him. They need an airtight case, and they know how to get it. The investigative team comes up with another sting operation. Detectives Linda Hilliard and Stephanie Campbell pose as women starting a dog bathing service. They come at a time when they know Howard will be home.
Hi. My name is Stephanie and this is Linda, and we're starting our own dog grooming business.
Their offer of a free introductory flea bath is too good for Howard to refuse.
Miss Penny.
Yes, Miss Princess Penny.
Let's see how she likes me. Does she like me all right? She's
very friendly. There you
Hi,
go.
how are you?
What a good girl.
Can I comb you a little bit? Is that
At an opportune moment, Hilliard pockets some hair.
good girl?
After the bath, Terry Jo invites the women into the living room. The detectives notice the color of the carpet. It's pink, similar to the fibers found on the murder victims. As Hilliard chats with Terry Jo, Campbell yanks out a few fibers. Back in the lab, the carpet fibers and dog hairs taken from Howard's home are compared to those found on the murder victims. They match. That means the women had either been inside the house or had come into physical contact with Randall or Howard. Detectives now have the evidence they need. They decide to move in on James Randall. But as they approach him, he flees suddenly, escaping into the nearby woods. A massive 4-day manhunt can't flush him out. Finally, an exhausted and dirty James Randall shows up back at Howard's front door, where he is taken into custody by waiting sheriff's deputies. Terry Jo Howard knew nothing of Randall's crimes. The evidence pointed squarely to him. Randall is tried and convicted of first-degree murder. He is sentenced to death. Forensic science has become one of the justice system's most powerful tools. But even the best tools can do great harm if they're misused.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth calls Angela Nichols to the stand.
A woman has been raped. At trial, she points out her attacker.
That is the man.
The defendant's name is Edward Honecker. His trial takes 2 days.
We find the defendant guilty on all charges.
Honecker is given life in prison, the maximum sentence. He wonders if he'll ever wake up from what he prays is a nightmare.
I remember when I was sentenced, it was like, you know, I didn't do this. My last words to the judge were, "You've convicted an innocent man."
Your Honor, the Commonwealth calls Elmer Gist.
The most damning testimony came from a state forensic examiner. Elmer Gist testified that hairs found on the victim closely matched Honecker's.
Same coloring. It is unlikely that the hair would match anyone other than the defendant.
He is without a doubt guilty. And you need
At the trial's conclusion, the jury took 2 hours to reach their verdict.
Guilty.
Honecker was sent to Nottoway Correctional Center in Burkeville, Virginia, to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Most people don't realize what it's like to be inside of a prison. Prison is hell on earth.
Honecker spent much of his time writing short stories, a novel, and letters, hundreds of letters. He tried to find someone on the outside who would listen, someone who would believe that a grave injustice had been done.
Centurion Ministries.
Then Ed heard about the Centurion Ministries, a nonprofit organization in Princeton, New Jersey, that tries to help people who have been wrongly imprisoned. His letter was read by staffer Kate Germond. Then she requested the transcripts from Honecker's trial. When she read them, she understood how Honecker got convicted.
Even through the dry transcripts, you could read the strength of the victim's testimony. This was the man.
That is the man.
So I understood it, but I also clearly saw, to my read, that he couldn't have committed the crime.
In the transcripts, Germond saw testimony she found troubling.
And what were those test results? We removed 2 hairs from the crime scene, which were...
The forensic scientist testified that the hairs found on the victim were most likely Honecker's.
It is unlikely that the hair matched anyone other than the defendant.
But could they be sure the hairs were Honecker's? Hairs simply aren't distinct enough to be linked to an individual.
The most we can ever say is that these hairs could have come, in quotes, from the same source. We can never say that this hair did, in fact, come from a given individual.
Dr. Peter DeForest is one of the world's leading authorities on the forensic analysis of hair. He was called in to re-examine the hair from the crime scene and compare it to Honecker's.
There are a number of features we look at.
DeForest first looks at the hair's color. Color in hair is determined by tiny pigment granules that appear here as brown speckles. Adjusting focus lets DeForest examine each plane of the hair shaft for pigment distribution. In some hairs, the granules are distributed evenly. In other hairs, they form clumps. Another characteristic of hair is its outer sheath, called the cuticle. The cuticle grows in overlapping scales, like the skin of a fish. These scales can be pointed, rounded, or square, and can lie very flat or curl up. Some hairs have a clearly visible inner shaft called a medulla. In other hairs, the medulla appears cracked and broken, or they have no medulla. DeForest looked for similarities between the hairs found on the victim and the hairs taken from Ed Honecker. He saw some similarities in color distribution, but he couldn't make a trait-for-trait match between crime scene hairs and any of Honecker's hairs. Based on his observations, DeForest concluded that the hair found on the victim probably did not belong to Honecker. DNA analysis is revolutionizing the criminal justice system. Each cell in the body contains DNA, which is shaped like twists on a ladder of chemical rungs. The sequence of these rungs is unique for each individual. Scientists can now remove DNA from body tissues and fluids and make key segments of it visible on X-ray film. The patterns produced in these films can positively link a suspect to DNA from a crime scene. But they can also exclude a suspect. Germond told Honecker that the test could exonerate him. But if his DNA did match the crime scene sperm, no one would ever again believe his claim of innocence. Honecker submitted a blood sample. Germond also persuaded the reluctant, now ex-boyfriend, to submit one as well. A few days later, the results came back. The boyfriend was excluded. The sperm wasn't his. Honecker was also excluded. There could no longer be any question. Edward Honecker was innocent.
That was it. All emotions that I had held in check for 10 years overwhelmed me.
After 10 years in prison, Honecker was pardoned and released. He returned to his home in Roanoke. Eventually, he received a settlement from the state of Virginia for his wrongful incarceration. DNA testing is giving a new chance to those who are unfairly trapped by an imperfect system of justice. But forensic science can do more than solve crimes. It can also uncover forgeries. Almost everyone on Earth recognizes this image, the Mona Lisa, one of history's greatest paintings, created by Leonardo da Vinci about 500 years ago. Few names in history are as revered as Leonardo da Vinci, a scientist, inventor, and painter. Da Vinci's masterful technique and his attention to anatomical accuracy are among his signature traits. But aside from the Last Supper and the Mona Lisa, only a handful of his paintings survive to this day. Some experts believe there are fewer than a dozen in all the world. But what if another Da Vinci survived? Is it conceivable that a work by the great master, lost centuries ago, could be discovered today? And if someone claimed to find such a painting, how could anyone be sure it was authentic? John Harrington, on the right, is an art collector who lives in Florida. He believes that this painting of Jesus Christ is, in fact, a long-lost Da Vinci.
Any help, Jeff? No, got it all right?
And for the past 10 years, he's been struggling to convince a skeptical world. Harrington has had a respected forensic scientist and a handful of scholars study the painting. If they agree it's authentic, the painting would instantly become one of the most valuable in existence. But has John Harrington really discovered a lost Da Vinci? How could a priceless masterwork have found its way to, of all places, Florida? In 1984, Harrington took a short drive from his Sarasota home to visit Mrs. Ida Martin.
Well, let's see. The painting's up here somewhere.
Harrington had heard that Mrs. Martin was selling a painting that had been in her family for centuries.
Careful, careful.
He immediately recognized the painting's subject.
Good. Let me get some light on it so I can really look at it.
A young Jesus Christ was pictured standing in front of a group of rabbis. This biblical scene, rendered by many artists throughout the centuries, is called Christ Among the Doctors. Harrington was intrigued. Some historians had written that Da Vinci had indeed painted a young Jesus Christ around the year 1504, but the work had been presumed lost. Could this be that painting? After a quick negotiation, the price was set. Harrington paid Mrs. Martin $3,500 and his diamond ring.
Thank you.
But now he faced the big question. How likely was it that he had really just purchased a long-lost Da Vinci? Harrington decided to bypass the contentious art world. He decided an impartial scientist should have the first look. He called Walter McCrone, one of the world's most respected forensic scientists. Harrington took the painting to McCrone's Research Institute in Chicago. Throughout his career, McCrone has analyzed hundreds of paintings. Using techniques that he's pioneered, McCrone tries to determine the painting's age. Knowing when a work was created may offer clues to who painted it. McCrone's first step is to take samples of the paint itself. For this delicate procedure, McCrone uses a stereoptical microscope, the same tool surgeons use to perform operations. The microscope lets McCrone see down to the level of the pigment particles. he pries them up with a tiny needle. Then he carefully places them on a microscope slide. To identify the particles in Harrington's painting, McCrone examines them under the polarizing light microscope. Because each color is made from a different mineral or vegetable base, each has a unique appearance under the microscope. In the past, pigments were ground by hand, so paints were lumpy and grainy. Today, paint making is highly mechanized. Pigments are ground for days between granite rollers to produce uniform particle size and distribution. So an old painting is like an archaeological find, a time capsule embedded in canvas. The microscope reveals the state of the art of paint making at the point in history the work was produced.
Each pigment we know when it was first used. Prussian blue, for example, is 1704. If I find Prussian blue in a painting, I know that at least that paint layer had to have been painted after 1704.
McCrone spent months examining the pigments in Christ Among the Doctors. He found no modern colors. In fact, he found that the pigments used in the painting were all in use during Da Vinci's time, 5 centuries ago. And McCrone found something else. Years earlier, he had analyzed Da Vinci's masterpiece, The Last Supper. McCrone now had samples of every pigment used in that painting. These were carefully saved on microscope slides. He found that the pigments used in The Last Supper were virtually identical to the ones he had found in Christ Among the Doctors, almost as if they had come from the same palette. McCrone looked at the paint's other ingredients, too. Besides pigment, which provides color, paint also contains a medium that suspends the pigment and allows the artist to use it on canvas. The most common medium is linseed oil, and most Renaissance painters used it. But Da Vinci, always an innovator, also used walnut oil in his paints. Using infrared absorption analysis, McCrone's lab attempted to identify the oil used in Christ Among the Doctors. The samples were too old to be conclusive, but the test indicated the presence of walnut oil. And McCrone also removed a small section of the canvas for carbon dating. This test would reveal the age of the canvas itself. The test produced a date of 1495, plus or minus 30 years. In 1495, Da Vinci was 43 years old.
I could conclude from what I did and from the carbon dating that the painting was almost undoubtedly done during Leonardo's lifetime.
When he completed his work, McCrone published his findings in a scientific journal. He stated that none of his tests of the pigments, the medium, or the canvas could rule out the possibility that the painting was a Da Vinci.
When you get results from the laboratory that say that you have pigments and canvas of the time of Leonardo da Vinci, it's very exciting because you're getting much closer than you thought you could. But you can't quite get to Leonardo's easel with those results because Leonardo and his school in Milan could all have access to the same kind of canvas, brushes, pigments, and mediums. They could all use the same thing.
It turned out that science could go only so far in determining the painting's origins. So Harrington was forced to return to the subjective world of art historians and other experts.
Yes, Mr. Harrington.
Harrington called in James Proctor, an art authenticator who had evaluated other alleged Da Vincis for private clients around the world. Proctor warned Harrington that he was skeptical, but he agreed to take a look.
Referring.
Proctor studied the painting closely. He saw something that, in his mind, left no doubt: the hole in Christ's wrist.
Da Vinci was the only one that ever put the nail hole in the proper area.
Da Vinci had studied human anatomy extensively. Unlike other artists of his day who showed Christ impaled through his palms, Da Vinci knew that the hands couldn't support the weight of the body. But the wrists could.
In my opinion and my expertise, this is by the hand of Leonardo da Vinci.
Scholars will continue to debate the origins of Christ among the doctors long into the future. Perhaps one day the truth about this painting will be known. But, as the scientist knows all too well, truth can be hard to separate from the world of human passion and prejudice. Did you know? It's not just the value of an artwork that determines whether someone might forge it. The difficulty of making the fake is just as important. Fewer than 1% of stone sculptures are forged because they require so much labor and so few people buy them. But as many as 10% of modern French paintings on the market may be forgeries because they are more popular and easier to make.